There's a war being fought right now, in this very moment, and most men have already surrendered without ever realizing they were soldiers. It's not a war of weapons or words, it's a war of emotional territory, a battle for who holds the frame, who maintains the center, who remains unmoved while chaos swirls around them. And the cruelest irony, the most devastating truth that will haunt you if you don't understand it, is this: she doesn't actually want you to surrender. The moment you lay down your arms, the moment you give her everything she says she wants, something inside her dies. Not because she's cruel, not because she's playing games, but because you've just eliminated the very thing that made you magnetic in the first place. Listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you contradicts everything modern culture has taught you about attraction, about desire, about what draws a woman to a man and keeps her there. You've been sold a lie wrapped in the language of fairness and equality, a narrative that sounds enlightened but leaves you confused, frustrated, watching the woman you care about lose interest despite your best efforts. You've become more available, more attentive, more willing to accommodate her every need, and somehow, impossibly, she's become more distant. You've increased your investment while her fascination has decreased. This isn't random, this isn't bad luck, this is physics, emotional physics that operates according to laws as reliable as gravity, laws that ancient philosophers understood, but modern men have forgotten. The philosophers of old, particularly those who studied human nature without the distortion of political correctness, recognized something fundamental about desire that makes most people uncomfortable. They understood that attraction isn't created through addition, it's created through resistance. Not cruelty, not indifference, but resistance. The kind of resistance that comes from a man who has something more important than any single woman's approval. A man who is moving toward a purpose that exists independently of her presence in his life. This creates a psychological tension that is absolutely intoxicating to the feminine psyche. Not because women are shallow or manipulative, but because this tension signals something profound, that you are a man of substance, a man who cannot be easily captured, a man whose center of gravity exists within himself rather than in her reactions to you. Think about every romantic story, every tale of passion and desire that has captivated human imagination for thousands of years. The common thread isn't the man who immediately capitulates, who makes himself completely available, who restructures his entire existence around the woman's needs. The magnetic figure, the one who commands fascination and devotion, is always the man who remains slightly out of reach, who maintains his own kingdom, his own purpose, his own emotional sovereignty. The knight who must complete his quest before he can claim his reward. The king who rules his domain and allows the queen to join that sovereignty, not the peasant who abandons his field to follow her carriage. The artist so absorbed in his creation that she must enter his world rather than him abandoning his work to enter hers. This isn't about playing games or manipulating emotions. This is about understanding the architecture of desire itself. When you make yourself completely available, when you drop everything at her text message, when you rearrange your schedule around her availability, when you seek her approval before making decisions, you're not being loving. You're being forgettable. You're eliminating the space between you, and it's precisely that space, that gap, that slight distance that creates the magnetic pull. Two magnets placed directly against each other don't pull, they're already touching. The magnetic force you feel, that invisible draw, only exists when there's space between them. Eliminate the space, and you eliminate the magnetism.
Now here's where it gets psychologically fascinating, where the paradox reveals itself in ways that will completely reframe how you understand female attraction. She will tell you she wants more attention, more time, more emotional availability. She'll say the words clearly. I wish you'd text me more. I want you to make me a priority. Why don't you ever cancel your plans for me? And these statements are honest. In that moment, she genuinely believes she wants these things. But watch what happens. Actually observe the behavioral response when you give her exactly what she's asking for. The attraction doesn't increase, it evaporates. She doesn't become more invested when you become more available. She becomes less interested when you make her the center of your universe. This isn't conscious. She's not sitting there calculating how to test you or manipulate you. This is operating at a level far deeper than conscious thought. This is her biological, psychological, evolutionary mechanism assessing your value, not through your words or your promises, but through your behavior. When you drop everything for her, you're communicating at a level words cannot reach, that you have nothing more important than her approval. And if you have nothing more important than her approval, then you're not the sovereign man she's biologically wired to find magnetic. You're the man who is seeking her to complete him, and completion is the death of attraction. She doesn't want to complete you. She wants to be drawn into the orbit of a man who is already complete, whose life has meaning and direction that exists independently of whether she's in it or not. Before you dismiss this as cold or unromantic, before you think this means you can't love deeply or care genuinely, understand the distinction I'm making here. I'm not telling you to be cruel or indifferent or emotionally unavailable. I'm telling you that your love, your care, your affection becomes infinitely more valuable when it comes from a place of abundance rather than need, from a position of centered strength rather than grasping desperation. The man who has built something meaningful, who is moving toward a vision, who has cultivated purpose and discipline and self-respect, and who then chooses to share that kingdom with a woman, that choice carries weight. That attention means something. But the man who has abandoned his own development, his own goals, his own self-respect to chase female approval, his attention is worthless because it comes from emptiness seeking to be filled. If you're watching this and recognizing yourself in the pattern I'm describing, if you're nodding along thinking about the relationship where you gave more and more while she pulled further and further away, don't skip ahead. Don't close this video. What comes next will change not just your relationships, but your entire understanding of masculine power. And make sure you're subscribed because we're going deep into territory that will make you see every interaction with women through a completely different lens. This isn't surface-level dating advice, this is psychological architecture. The ancient Stoics understood something about desire that modern psychology has only recently begun to validate through research. They recognized that the human psyche is fundamentally drawn to that which remains partially unconquered, partially mysterious, partially independent of our control. The Stoic philosopher, maintaining his inner fortress, remaining unmoved by external chaos, was attractive not despite his emotional self-sufficiency, but because of it. He represented something rare and valuable, a consciousness that could not be easily invaded, a center that held firm regardless of external pressure, and this created a psychological pull far more powerful than any amount of eager availability ever could.
Consider the psychological concept of intermittent reinforcement, the pattern of reward that creates the strongest behavioral conditioning. Slot machines are designed around this principle. Give the reward sometimes, but not always. Make the timing unpredictable, and you create obsessive engagement far beyond what consistent reward would generate. When you're always available, always responsive, always accommodating, you're providing consistent reinforcement. There's no mystery, no variation, no tension. You've become predictable. And predictability in the early and middle stages of attraction is fatal. She knows exactly how you'll respond, exactly how much you'll bend, exactly how available you'll be. And this knowledge doesn't create security, it creates boredom. But the man who has genuine boundaries, who actually has commitments he won't break, who has a Tuesday night routine he maintains regardless of whether she's free, who doesn't text back instantly because he's genuinely absorbed in something important, this man creates the psychological tension that captivates. It's not calculated, it's not a technique. It's the natural result of a man who has built a life of meaning that exists before she arrived and will continue after she leaves. This is the frame that makes her want to enter your world, rather than you abandoning your kingdom to wander in hers. Let me tell you what happens in the mind of a woman when she encounters genuine masculine resistance, when she meets a man who is kind and respectful, but fundamentally unmoved by her tests and emotional fluctuations. First, there's often frustration. She's used to men rearranging themselves around her moods, apologizing for things they didn't do, seeking her approval like oxygen. When you don't do this, when you remain calm and directed regardless of her emotional weather, it creates initial confusion. This is the testing phase, where she'll unconsciously escalate, push harder, create more drama, trying to find the point where you'll break frame and start chasing her approval. Most men fail this test within days or weeks. They interpret her escalation as a sign that they need to be more accommodating, more available, more willing to prove themselves. And the moment they break, the attraction dies. But if you hold frame, if you remain unshakable, something profound shifts in her psychology. The frustration transforms into fascination. She begins to realize that you're not like the other men, that your center of gravity truly is internal, that you're not performing this confidence, you're actually living from it. And this realization triggers something primal in her attraction mechanism. She stops testing and starts investing. She stops demanding and starts offering. She stops trying to pull you into her frame and starts entering yours, not because you've dominated her or controlled her, but because you've demonstrated the one quality that is genuinely rare in modern men. You don't need her approval to feel valuable, and therefore, your choice to include her in your life actually means something. This is the paradox that drives weak men insane and makes strong men magnetic. The less you need her, the more she wants you. Not the less you care about her, but the less you need her validation to feel complete. There's a massive difference between those two positions. The man who doesn't care is just emotionally unavailable, damaged, running from intimacy. But the man who cares deeply yet doesn't need, who can love genuinely while remaining centered in himself, this man is irresistible because he offers something incredibly rare. The possibility of being with someone strong enough to not be consumed by the relationship, not lost in her emotional storms, not transformed into a needy validation seeker the moment she shows interest.
Watch what happens in long-term relationships when men abandon this principle. The passionate beginning, the intense attraction, the sense that she can't get enough of him. All of this slowly erodes as he becomes more domesticated, more accommodating, more willing to sacrifice his boundaries and his purpose to keep the peace. He thinks he's being mature, being a good partner, prioritizing the relationship. But what he's actually doing is eliminating the very qualities that made her choose him in the first place. He's removing his edges, his sovereignty, his sense of direction that exists independently of her approval. And she doesn't consciously recognize what's happening. She just knows that somehow the attraction has faded, that she doesn't feel that pull anymore, that she's become more like his mother or his manager than his lover. If you're in a relationship right now where this dynamic has already set in, where you've been the accommodating nice guy and watched her respect and attraction diminish, I want you to understand something crucial. This isn't permanent. Attraction can be rebuilt, but not by doing more of what killed it in the first place. You don't re-attract her by being even more available, even more accommodating, even more desperate to prove your commitment. You re-attract her by reclaiming your sovereignty, by rebuilding the life and purpose and direction that you abandoned when you made her the center of your existence. This isn't about punishment or withdrawal. This is about genuine transformation, about becoming again the man who doesn't need her approval because he's building something meaningful that exists with or without her participation. The practical application of this understanding will transform every interaction you have with women, and this is where I want you to pay close attention because these principles work at every stage, from first meeting to decades into marriage. When you meet a woman and there's initial interest, your instinct, programmed by years of cultural conditioning, is to capitalize on that interest by increasing availability, by pursuing harder, by making your interest obvious and your availability clear. This is exactly backwards. The interest she shows is a spark, and sparks need oxygen and fuel to become fires. If you smother the spark with immediate over-availability, you extinguish it before it can grow. Instead, you let the spark exist in the space between you. You match her interest, but you don't exceed it. You're glad to see her, but you're not rearranging your life around her. You enjoy the conversation, but you're the one who ends it first because you have somewhere to be. This isn't game playing.
This is having a life. Comment below if you're starting to see how this applies to your own situation, because the next phase is where most men completely sabotage themselves, and I want to make sure you're understanding this deeply enough to avoid that trap. When a woman starts to show more interest, starts reaching out more, starts making herself more available, the masculine instinct is to mirror this, to escalate your availability in response to hers. Again, this is backwards. Her increased interest is a response to your centered unavailability. The moment you become more available in response to her interest, you remove the very thing that created her interest. This is the cruel loop that traps most men. They finally get female interest and immediately kill it by becoming too available. Instead, you remain consistent. Your availability, your investment, your focus on your purpose stays the same, regardless of whether she's showing high interest or low interest. This consistency, this unmoved center, is what allows attraction to build and deepen rather than spike and crash.
Now let's talk about the specific behaviors that communicate either centered masculinity or desperate need, because this is where theory meets practice. When she texts you, your response time communicates volumes. If you're always responding immediately, within seconds or minutes regardless of what you're doing, you're communicating that you have nothing more important than her messages, that you're waiting for her contact, that you're available at her convenience. The man of value responds when it's natural for him to respond, which might be immediately if he's free, or might be hours later if he's absorbed in something important. The key is that his response time is driven by his actual engagement with his life, not by a strategy to play hard to get, and certainly not by anxious eagerness to keep her attention. When she creates drama or emotional turbulence, your response determines whether you're in your masculine frame or in her emotional frame. The weak response is to immediately try to fix it, to apologize even when you've done nothing wrong, to rearrange your position to accommodate her emotional state. This communicates that her emotions control your behavior, that you're a reactionary rather than a centered man. The strong response is to remain calm, to acknowledge her feelings without being consumed by them, to maintain your perspective even when she's emotionally escalated. This doesn't mean being dismissive or cold. It means being the oak tree in her emotional storm, present and solid, but unmoved and unbroken by the weather. This is what she needs, even when it's not what she's asking for in the moment. When she tests your boundaries, which will happen constantly in the early stages and periodically throughout any relationship, your response determines the entire future trajectory. She says she wants you to cancel your plans to see her. She suggests you should stop going to the gym so much so you can spend more time together. She complains that your career is taking too much of your focus. These are tests, not malicious manipulations, but unconscious assessments of whether you're a man who holds his frame or a man who abandons his boundaries to maintain female approval. If you fold, if you cancel your plans, if you reduce your gym time, if you deprioritize your career to accommodate her comfort, you failed the test. You've communicated that she's your priority over your own development and direction, which sounds romantic but is actually the death of attraction. The man who passes these tests doesn't argue or defend himself aggressively. He simply maintains his boundaries with calm certainty. He's going to the gym because physical excellence is part of his value system, and she's welcome to join that value system, but she's not going to change it. He's focused on his career because he's building something meaningful, and she's invited to support that vision, but she's not going to derail it. He keeps his commitments to his friends and his interests because he's a man of integrity whose word means something, and that integrity is not negotiable, even for her comfort. This unwavering consistency is what transforms initial attraction into deep respect and lasting desire. Make sure you hit the like button if this is resonating with you, because what comes next is the philosophical foundation that ties all of this together and will completely reframe how you understand not just attraction, but masculine development itself.
The reason these principles work isn't because women are irrational or because relationships are games. They work because they align with fundamental truths about human psychology and the nature of desire that ancient wisdom traditions understood deeply. The Tao Te Ching speaks of the power of the valley, the low place that all water flows toward, not through force, but through natural principle. The masculine man becomes this valley by being centered, by being unmoved, by being the stable point that doesn't chase but naturally attracts through his own groundedness. The Stoics understood that the only thing within your control is your own consciousness, your own response, your own center. Everything external is ultimately beyond your control, including whether any particular woman chooses you or stays with you. But the paradox is that by fully accepting this lack of control, by genuinely building your life on the foundation of your own purpose and values rather than on female approval, you become infinitely more attractive because you've eliminated the neediness that repels feminine energy. You're not trying to control her response. You're simply being a man of substance and allowing her to respond naturally to that substance. This is why the journey of masculine development and the journey of becoming attractive to high-quality women are the same journey. You don't become attractive by learning techniques or strategies for manipulating female psychology. You become attractive by becoming a man of genuine substance, by building something real, by developing discipline and purpose and self-respect. These qualities are attractive not because they're performance, but because they're real, because they emanate from you naturally when you've done the work of building a meaningful life. The woman who is drawn to you is responding not to a tactic, but to the genuine energy of a man who has somewhere to go and something to build that exists independently of her validation. So here's what I want you to understand as we reach the conclusion of this exploration. You have been given a map to territory that most men never discover, principles that will transform not just your relationships with women, but your entire orientation toward life. The man who needs female approval to feel valuable is trapped in a prison of his own making, constantly seeking external validation that never satisfies because the internal foundation is hollow. But the man who builds his value on purpose, on discipline, on meaningful work, on genuine development, this man doesn't need to chase attraction because attraction chases him. Not because he's perfect, not because he's wealthy or famous or physically ideal, but because he embodies something increasingly rare: masculine sovereignty, the centered presence of a man who knows where he's going and why. This is your choice right now, in this moment. You can continue down the path of seeking female approval, of making yourself more available, of abandoning your boundaries and your purpose to accommodate female comfort, and you will continue to experience the frustration of watching attraction die despite your best efforts. Or you can choose the harder but infinitely more rewarding path of building genuine masculine substance, of developing purpose and discipline and self-respect that exists independently of any woman's response to you, and in doing so, become the kind of man that high-quality women naturally want to follow, to support, to build with. The choice is yours, but understand that this choice will determine not just your success with women, but the entire trajectory of your life. Subscribe to this channel if you want more truth about masculine development and attraction that goes against everything you've been taught, but aligns with everything that actually works. The journey we're on together is about reclaiming sovereignty, about understanding the psychological and philosophical foundations of masculine power, about becoming men who don't need to chase because we've built lives worth being chosen for. This isn't entertainment, this is transformation, and it starts with the decision you make right now about what kind of man you're going to become.